About 150 years ago, when the first white people began trekking across America to seek their fortunes in the goldfields of California, this was the part of that massive journey that they feared and hated the most. We're in the middle of the American desert in the southwest of the USA, a stretch of country nearly 1,500 kilometers wide. In July, the temperature can hit over 50 degrees centigrade. The amount of rain in a year adds up to no more than a few millimeters, and even then, there may be 3 or 4 years in a row when there's no rain at all. It must have been the most frightening experience to attempt this desert crossing with nothing more than horses and wagons. But there was one spot on the way across that would have taken the travelers' breath away. They would have come across it very suddenly after slogging for weeks through the desert, and they must have jumped for joy. What they saw is just over there. What must have been an almost unbelievable sight was the Colorado River. Fed by water from rain and snow at its source in the Rocky Mountains, this magical strip of blue cuts straight through the desert from one side to the other. It's the only river in the southwest of the USA to do this. There are 25 other rivers in the United States that carry more water than the Colorado, so it's not a big river by American standards. But size is not the point. What makes the Colorado so important is where it is and what's been done with it. For well over half its length, it's not nature that controls the Colorado, but engineering, and that means dams. 20 of them have been built across the river to store water and generate electricity. In the last 600 kilometers of the river's course, there's scarcely a stretch of the Colorado left in its natural state. The river itself has disappeared. In its place, the enormous reservoirs that have spread out behind the dams. Something else that makes the Colorado so important is that the water and the electricity from its dams are used right across the American desert. Thanks to the desert river, there are desert cities, oases of glitter that either burn the Colorado's electricity, drink its water, or both. They are some of the most modern, fastest growing cities in the United States, like this one for instance, Las Vegas, the gambling capital of America, a crazy fairyland that's lit up by Colorado electricity. The Colorado's route from its source in the Rocky Mountains to its mouth in the Gulf of California is a long one, cutting right across the southwest of the USA. It's reckoned that in one way or another, around 25 million people depend on the river, including those living in 5 big cities. But the map of the Colorado and the southwest has only looked like this for a very short space of time. Not that long ago, it was a very different kind of place. At that time, and we're talking about roughly 60 years ago, there were huge areas across the United States of untouched country. It was also the time when the American government and the American people thought that if the map still showed an empty space, then there must be something very wrong. Much better to do something with it, build something on it. And what better example could there be than the Colorado River? 2,000 kilometers of untapped water flowing like some sort of miracle through the desert. Those empty spaces add up to about a quarter of the total land area of the United States. That is the enormous size of the country's dry zone, a region where it is still possible to go for hours without seeing a trace of anything to do with people. The word desert often conjures up pictures of endless sand dunes stretching to the horizon. Yet often, as here, deserts aren't like that at all. What's more, the landscape of the dry zone changes quite frequently. But there's always one thing that's true throughout. In the east of the USA, there's usually enough rain. Here in the west, there usually isn't. If anything was to be built in these vast open spaces, nothing could happen without water, and that would mean building dams. In 1928, the site for the first dam on the Colorado was chosen, at a place called Boulder Canyon. It marked the beginning of the story of putting the Colorado to work. Nobody anywhere in the world had ever built a dam as big as this one. From start to finish, engineers had to think up new ways of doing things, like how to make 40 million tons of cement in the middle of nowhere, how to shift massive equipment from the top to the bottom of a 300-meter deep gorge, how to make the gigantic parts that would be installed in the power station, and how to transport them there. How to cope with 5,000 new arrivals in the desert, the size of the workforce that was hired from all over the USA. It took 4 years to build, 2 years less than originally thought. When finished, this giant barrier across the Colorado was named the Hoover Dam. So here it is, one of the best-known landmarks in the United States. When it was finished in 1935, there were people claiming that it was the biggest man-made structure on Earth, a man-made wonder far more spectacular even than the tallest skyscraper yet built. Something someone even said to compare in scale with the pyramids of Egypt. Taking things a bit far, maybe, but there was absolutely no doubt about what the Hoover Dam stood for. It had proved that not only could the Colorado be controlled, but also that the desert itself could be brought to life. As always in the desert, anything man-made comes at you out of nowhere, like here around Phoenix, the capital of the state of Arizona. On 3 sides of the city is some of the richest farmland in the USA, thanks to the magic ingredient, water from the irrigation canals. On the 4th side of the city, the desert comes to another sudden stop, and then what 99% of the city of Phoenix is, endless suburbs, green, irrigated, watery, mile after mile of them. Phoenix is one of America's boom cities. The locals say it grows in one of 2 ways, either fast or very fast. And that's what it's been doing for the last 40 years. It's taken Phoenix only that long to grow from the size of a small town to that of a city that measures 80 kilometers across. In the 1980s, there were times when 3,000 people a month were moving into Phoenix from parts of the USA where industries were closing down.
Dad, when are we going to get a phone?
Bob Teller and his family left their home in the state of Michigan, 2,000 kilometers away in the north of the USA.
Lines are all full and they're putting new lines in.
We got to wait a month before we get a phone?
Yeah.
The car industry, Michigan's biggest employer, was going through a rough patch, and people were leaving in droves as the industry cut back. For huge numbers of families like the Tellers, it was the same story. A new home and a new job in Phoenix in the sunny south, and goodbye to the north, where both husband and wife had lost their jobs.
Now that looks like 3 pictures on the wall.
How's it look?
Looks pretty good.
There was a lot of people out looking for work. There was nothing available. You couldn't even get a job at a McDonald's at $1.25 an hour. It got so bad that there was bumper stickers in Michigan, and this is no lie, that they had them on the back. The last one out of Michigan, please turn out the lights. And rather than coming home forlorn about being laid off, I come home with a big smile on my face. And I told her, I says, I got laid off. And she says, well, what are you so happy about? I says, well, this is our chance. That you're not working, I'm not working, now we're going to go south.
Go south, the message of the 1980s. A message that brought 500,000 people to Phoenix in the space of 10 years. And in the 1990s, there are precious few signs that things are any different. In Phoenix, the latest chunk of city sprawl is burrowing into the side of these desert hills, nearly 30 kilometers by road from the city center. And then from here, for about 12 kilometers along the foot of the hills, it's all happening. Bit by bit, the land is being transformed from desert into housing estates. In a city that's growing as fast as Phoenix, building houses is an industry in itself. Changing desert into comfortable suburbs is a complicated job. On a housing estate like this, a perfectly ordinary one by Phoenix standards, almost all the homes will have air conditioning, and many will have swimming pools. Putting in the necessary electricity and water supplies costs a lot of money. Taming the desert is an expensive business, yet one at least that keeps a lot of people in work. Just around that estate alone, there were small firms doing a huge range of quite specialized things. One was building barbecue patios, another one was putting in Hawaiian-style swimming pools, and one advertising itself as experts in fancy stairways. But more to the point in Phoenix, since here we are in the middle of the desert, there was a company offering to bring soil to your home so that you could have a garden. Then for your grass, you go to another company called Layer Lawn, and finally cactus carriers would bring along your plants. No desert suburb is complete, though, without the colour green. Golf courses, lawns, grass by the sides of the roads, all of them man-made landscapes. To keep the Phoenix oasis looking green costs yet more money. And the way it's done has to do with these bits of plastic tubing. They poke up out of the ground on every single roadside verge in Phoenix, and often there's one to every plant. They are, in fact, sprinklers, connected underground to the public water supply. They come on automatically a few times a day, and it's one of the city's most familiar sights, and one of its biggest surprises if you happen to be walking past at the wrong moment. After who knows how many hundreds of kilometers of water pipes, suburbia finally begins to peter out. Well, this looks at last to be the end of the road, quite literally. We're about 42 kilometers drive from the city centre. People have already started to move into that new estate over there. But that way, absolutely nothing except the saguaro cacti and 200 kilometers of desert to the next city. The new schools in the desert suburbs are fascinating places to be. Everybody is more or less a new arrival. Making friends means getting to know people who may all have moved to Phoenix from thousands of kilometers away. In one third-year class in this school, I discovered that only 2 people were born in Phoenix. Everybody else was from somewhere else, from states all across the USA.
I'm from Washington.
I'm from Idaho.
I'm from Florida. I'm from Ohio.
Texas.
I'm from California.
I'm from Missouri.
I'm from Indiana.
I'm from Georgia.
On average, American families move 4 times more often than the British. At the age of 14, Jennifer Dixon has already lived in 5 different places before coming to Phoenix. I asked her what she felt about being constantly on the move.
I think it's exciting. You know, we have a lot of fun. Like when we move to all different places, it's like a new adventure every time. It was hard to leave my friends, but then I still keep in touch with a lot of them, and so I think it's exciting to make new friends because now I have friends all over the United States.
Her parents have almost lost track of the number of homes they've had in the USA.
We believe it's 9, and I'll run through them for you. After we were married, we lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. Then we moved to Elmira, New York. From Elmira, we moved to Columbia, South Carolina. From Columbia, we went to Manchester, New Hampshire. From Manchester, we went down to Coral Springs, Florida, worked in Boca Raton, Florida. From there, we went to Franklin Lakes, New Jersey. From Franklin Lakes, we moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. And from Atlanta, Georgia, to Phoenix, our present home.
I like moving around. This is the first place I've been that I really want to stay. The other places, every time we moved in, I think we knew in the back of our mind it was only going to be for a couple of years. And if you know that, you know, you don't really put down any kind of roots or anything like that. And now that we're here, I can't see ever wanting to go anywhere else. This is the first place I really, really like.
But how do you cope with the heat here in the summer? I mean, you're talking about temperatures of 120 degrees?
Air-conditioned house, air-conditioned car, air-conditioned office, and as you look out the window, the pool, the swimming pool. Last summer was really a scorcher. I mean, we had 115 to 120 like for 14 straight days. So much so that the airport shut down because the heat on the runway was too much for the tires of the airplane.
To have created home comforts in these conditions is, on the one hand, an incredible feat. On the other, you might well ask the question, is it all beginning to look like an enormous waste of money? Well, for a long time, it wasn't really something that many people gave too much thought to. Indeed, the fact that the desert could, as has happened in thousands of places, be turned into something like this was looked on as a sort of conquest of nature. The big dams on the rivers, like the Colorado, would supply the water and the power for homes, for industry, and for farming, and would carry on doing so. You could have lawns, gardens, plants, golf courses, lakes, even fountains in the middle of the desert. No problem. Or is there? Can the oases in the desert really go on growing like this? Or will there come a point when things start going wrong? A 150 years ago, one of the first explorers to set foot in this part of the United States wrote in his diary, "The region is, of course, totally without value. Once you have arrived, the only thing to do is leave. As for the Colorado River, it seems that nature intended it to flow along its lonely and majestic way, forever unvisited and undisturbed." Yet, from what we saw in the first part of this 2-part story, we know just how wrong that explorer turned out to be. Today, along most of the Colorado's course, nature has gone and engineering has taken over. The number of dams built on the river stands at 20. The water they store is pumped to around 25 million people living in the American desert. The pipelines and canals that carry water from the Colorado are hundreds of kilometers long. It's often said that the engineers have done a replumbing job on the desert. The canals and pipes reach out to 5 big desert cities. This is one of them, Phoenix, the capital of the state of Arizona. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the USA. In the previous program, we saw something of how Phoenix is growing. In this one, we'll start by finding out why. What kind of industries are behind this boom? At first sight, Phoenix doesn't look as if it has any industry at all. There's not a single old-fashioned factory chimney in sight. The reason is simple. Phoenix has grown so quickly that it's never had any old industries, only new ones. The nearest things in the city to a factory district are low, flat buildings built in the 1970s and 80s by the sides of the main roads. The industry that set up inside them was electronics. The firms that moved to Phoenix got a good deal from the city. Land was sold to them at a cheap price, and taxes were low. And then, if you were looking for somewhere to put together things like radios, cassette recorders, or telephones, why not do it in a place where the sun almost always shines? But by Phoenix standards, this sort of thing is already old hat. The latest arrivals are high-tech companies. For the city, it's another new look in the desert oasis. Not what you'd normally expect an industrial landscape to look like, but very much so the sort of industrial area that's become more and more common in Phoenix as the high-tech companies have moved in. These brand new firms like to look good, not just in the design of their buildings, but in their surroundings too. In this industrial park, they've spent a huge amount of money on landscaping. The final touch, believe it or not, was to make an artificial river right here in the middle of the desert. We're inside one of the latest high-tech companies to set up in Phoenix. What they make here is so small and delicate that a tiny single speck of dust can ruin it. So, before going into parts of the plant where it's made and tested, everybody has to have the dust blown off them in an air shower. And then, with only your eyes left open to the air, a final seal top to bottom to stop any remaining dust floating out of your clothes. There aren't many things around these days that can make do without one of these things. They're chips, the nerve center, or the brains, if you like, of countless machines and electronic items. Chips from this plant in Phoenix end up in personal computers, computer games, fax machines, robots, and 101 other things, from cars to the space shuttle. Once upon a time, the industrial cities of America became famous for making massive, heavy things, like steel ships or cars. Now, the boom cities at the top of the list, like Phoenix, are far more likely to be making these minute wafers of chips that weigh almost nothing. The highest of high tech in an oasis in the desert. With that kind of image, it's not difficult for Phoenix to keep attracting new people to the city. Phoenix offers a home of your own in a kind of endless suburbia, far from the noise and crowds you usually get in big cities. It's a place where the sun hardly ever stops shining, where the desert heat has been tamed by air conditioning in homes, where an artificial landscape of plants and greenery soften the view. Make the move to Phoenix, where even the industrial districts look like holiday resorts. The only trouble is, over the last 10 years, that's exactly what 500,000 people have all gone and done. Phoenix now has a bad pollution problem. On many days, a brownish-grey cloud of traffic fumes gets trapped against the surrounding mountains. There's now 1 car to every 2 people in the city. For years, the city of Phoenix thought it could do without a big freeway system. It did not, so it said, want to become like Los Angeles in California, the city with more freeways than any other in the United States. What's happened there is frightening. Los Angeles has discovered to its cost that more freeways simply make more traffic, so much so that the city spends up to 10 hours a day with its freeways gridlocked, that is to say, jam-packed, bumper to bumper. But as the years went by and more cars poured onto the streets of Phoenix, the city realized that it could no longer cope. Freeways it would have to be. In fact, 350 kilometers of brand new ones. It is the biggest city road building project in the USA. Some districts in the city are being ripped apart. The plan involves ploughing the new roads everywhere, through the city centre, through the suburbs and round the edge. The number of homes that will have to be knocked down runs into tens of thousands. Phoenix will need £3.5 billion to carry out the whole scheme. But with only 65 kilometres of the 350 in the plan completed, the project is already in serious trouble. To cut a long story short, it's run out of money. At spots all over the city, new stretches of freeway come to a sudden stop. Land has been cleared, but the bridges, the overpasses, the underpasses lead nowhere. There are thousands of people left wondering when the freeway is going to come, or whether it's going to come at all. This is the position the Orlando family find themselves in. Their house was due to be bought by the city and knocked down to make way for a freeway. Then, suddenly, the road building stopped. Meanwhile, the city won't buy their house, and neither, of course, will anybody else, since sometime or other, the freeway presumably will be built.
Almost. You got the
Just down the road from their home, the Orlandos took me to a spot where a huge area had already been flattened, just before the money for the freeway scheme ran out. So Al, what used to be here where all this wasteland is?
These were all $70,000, $90,000 to $100,000 homes that have been taken out in preparation for the freeway.
Really? How long ago was that?
That was, how long ago was that, Deb?
Last summer.
Last summer. That's when they
A year
stopped.
ago.
And in the meantime now, I mean, will a motorway ever come through here? A freeway ever come through here?
I wouldn't cross my fingers. I wouldn't bank on it. We
Plan.
hope so.
So what happens to this land in the meantime?
It just sits here, empty.
Meanwhile, the Orlandos are stuck. Nobody wants to buy their house because eventually it'll be knocked down. It's a situation that thousands of people in Phoenix are in and that nobody likes.
Well, for a family like ours where home is the most important thing, your home is no longer yours. You can't improve it, you can't add things, you can't count on living there for very long.
Our lives are on hold right now and we really can't make any plans for the future. And we don't want to put a lot of repairs into the house because we won't get anything out of it in the long run. So it's devastating at this point.
The fact that the scheme has been stopped has come as a real shock to Phoenix, because in this part of the United States, it has always been taken for granted that big projects get finished, and the bigger, the better. After all, for the last 50 years, that's exactly what has happened all along the Colorado River. Without the massive dams, there would have been no cities in the desert, no industry, no agriculture. In fact, there came a point about 30 years ago when it began to look as if there was no room left on the river for any more dams. Yet, the region was still growing fast and needed even more electricity and more water. For the last 600 kilometers of its course, before it flows into the sea, there was really precious little of the Colorado left in its natural state. In fact, it wasn't really a river at all, more just a series of dams and reservoirs, churning out electricity and storing water for the booming desert cities. To find a site for the next dam then, the engineers had to look a long, long way inland, over 1,000 kilometers from the mouth of the Colorado to this remote spot in the northern desert, at a place called Glen Canyon. Glen Canyon was finished in 1966, and it was the first time there had ever been an argument about whether building a dam on the Colorado had been the right thing to do. That argument was about the huge lake that built up behind the dam wall. On the one hand, there were those who said that the lake had made an already beautiful area even more beautiful. On the other hand, those against the lake pointed to how wasteful it all was. Every year, 725 million tons of water are lost by seeping into the sandstone rock around the shore. The same amount is evaporated into the air by the burning desert sun. And then there's the sheer size of the lake, 290 kilometers long, an enormous amount of land flooded forever. Maybe, said those against the scheme, it was time to leave the Colorado alone once and for all. But there were many people who didn't see it that way at all, and they were the people living in the state of Arizona. Their point was that although huge amounts of Colorado water had already been sent to other parts of the desert, they'd so far seen very little of it. So, to see to it that Arizona got its fair share, the engineers worked out that there was still enough water left in the river for one last big scheme. It starts here on the shores of a reservoir, behind one of the old dams. The scheme begins by channeling a tenth of the Colorado's flow out of the reservoir into a large pumping station. The pumps push the water into huge pipes buried in the hillside, lifting it 250 meters upwards on its way into Arizona. The water emerges into what has been called the longest irrigation ditch in the world. The canal is a complicated piece of engineering. The whole thing is scanned by computer every 30 seconds. The computer knows how much water is in it, how much to deliver to users along the way, and how much the pumping stations have to cope with. Step by step, through each pumping station, the water rises close to 1,000 meters in height as it travels through Arizona. The total length of the desert crossing is an amazing 550 kilometers. It's a lifeline for the two biggest cities in Arizona, Tucson and Phoenix. By the time the water has traveled 300 kilometers from the river and passed through 4 pumping stations, it reaches this one, pumping station number 5 on the edge of the city of Phoenix. For a long time, the idea of bringing water all the way here from the Colorado River was thought to be crazy, a bit of a fairy story because of the immense distance involved. But now, at last, here it is. After £3.5 billion worth of canal building, water from the Colorado River, and quite possibly the most expensive water in the world, flows into Phoenix, the biggest oasis in the Arizona desert. The new canal has arrived in the nick of time because the Phoenix area is facing a real emergency. it's running seriously short of water. As well as getting its water by canals that bring it in from rivers, the city has always taken it from somewhere else too, from below the ground. The earth beneath Phoenix once held large amounts of water that built up over millions of years, when the climate in the area was much wetter than it is today. This water has been pumped out at an alarming rate. The level has dropped 3 meters every year and is now so far below the surface that it's getting beyond reach. In many of the farming areas in the Phoenix Oasis, the days when farmers switched on their pumps and turned the desert green may soon be ending. It's some of the most fertile land in the USA, famous for rich harvests of vegetables, fruit and cotton. But land in the desert can only come to life like this with water, and the time is not very far off when water supplies to farms will have to be cut back or will run out for good. The city of Phoenix, too, knows that its days of transforming the desert with vast amounts of water are numbered. It'll soon have to forget the idea that a new suburb will automatically get an artificial lake, that the desert heat will always be made more bearable by making everything look lush, green and cool. At the moment, nobody knows where any more water will come from. There's absolutely none to spare in the Colorado River. Indeed, there are already long stretches where the river is drying out and marshland is taking over. Having given water to 25 million people, the river is worn out. If the oases in the American desert are planning to go on growing as fast as they have until now, they may well have to think again.